The most unequal math problem in modern warfare. Picture this, a rusty, barnacle-covered metal sphere, roughly the size of a washing machine, drifting silently beneath the surface of the Persian Gulf. It costs less than a used motorcycle, it has no radar, no GPS, no AI targeting system, it doesn't even need one, it just waits. Now picture what happens next. A supertanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil screeches to a halt 400 nautical miles away. Oil futures spike 8% in a single afternoon. Shipping insurance premiums quadruple overnight. A German automaker quietly begins rationing production. Airline fuel surcharges appear on your flight ticket before the week is out. $1,000 in economic shockwaves. This isn't a hypothetical. This is the brutal mathematical reality of the Strait of Hormuz. The world's most important 21-mile wide chokepoint, and understanding it completely reframes everything you thought you knew about modern military power. Act 1. The weapon that embarrasses trillion-dollar navies. Let's start with the numbers because they are almost obscene in their imbalance. The United States Navy's most advanced destroyer, the Arleigh Burke-class, costs approximately $2 per vessel. It carries Tomahawk cruise missiles, the most sophisticated phased array radar systems ever built, and enough electronics to run a small country. It can track ballistic missiles in space and intercept hypersonic threats traveling at Mach 5. An Iranian naval mine manufactured in facilities that look like they belong in a 1970s machine shop costs somewhere between $1 and $15,000 depending on the variant. The most commonly deployed versions, derivative designs based on Soviet-era technology, clock in at roughly $1,500 apiece. The combat exchange ratio here is not 10 to 1 or even 100 to 1. We are talking about a ratio of roughly 500,000 to 1, but here's what makes naval mines uniquely diabolical. All of those billions of dollars spent on radar, stealth, and long-range missiles are almost completely irrelevant against an object that simply sits on the seabed and does nothing. You cannot intercept a mine with a Patriot battery. You cannot jam its guidance system because it has no guidance system. The most sophisticated electronic warfare suite in human history cannot confuse a pressure-sensitive trigger that fires. When a 300,000-ton oil tanker passes overhead, the mine is not trying to win a fight. It is simply waiting for the enemy to come to it. And in the Strait of Hormuz, the enemy always comes because there's almost nowhere else to go. Act 2. The 2-mile corridor that controls everything. To understand why the Strait of Hormuz is so catastrophically vulnerable, you need to understand its geography with some precision. The strait itself is roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, between the Iranian coastline and the tip of the Musandam Peninsula in Oman. But the deep-water shipping channels, the lanes where tankers large enough to carry meaningful amounts of oil can safely transit, are far narrower. The internationally recognized traffic separation scheme divides the strait into 2 lanes, one inbound and one outbound, each approximately 2 miles wide, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. 2 miles. That's roughly the distance you can comfortably jog in 20 minutes. Iran does not need to mine the entire Persian Gulf. It does not need to mine the entire strait. It needs only to seed sufficient uncertainty into those specific 2-mile corridors to make commercial shipping insurers declare them effectively impassable. The difference is enormous. Blocking 21 miles of open water is a massive military undertaking. Creating credible uncertainty across a 2-mile shipping lane requires only a handful of minds and the willingness to use them. This is the strategic genius, if we can call it that, of Iran's naval doctrine. They have spent decades studying exactly where Western economies are most vulnerable to the lowest possible cost intervention. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a geographic choke point, it is an economic pressure point so precise that even the threat of mining it causes measurable market disruptions. Approximately 20 to 21% of the world's petroleum liquids pass through this strait every single day. That's roughly 18 million barrels. The countries whose economies depend on that flow include Japan, which imports nearly 90% of its oil through the strait, South Korea, India, China, and virtually every economy in between. A credible mining threat doesn't need to stop every tanker. It needs to stop enough of them long enough for the financial mathematics to do the rest of the work. Act 3. How insurance becomes the real weapon. This is the part of the story that most military analysis skips over, and it is arguably the most important part. The moment a credible naval mine threat is established in the Strait of Hormuz, meaning the moment even one commercial vessel is struck, or even the moment intelligence services begin reporting mine-laying activity, a very specific and almost automatic chain of financial events is set in motion. Lloyd's of London and the broader marine insurance market will typically designate the area as a war risk zone within 24 to 48 hours of a confirmed incident. This is not a political decision. It is a contractual one, triggered by the terms of standard marine insurance policies that have been in use in various iterations. Since the 18th century, once the war risk zone designation is in place, ship owners face a fundamental financial calculation. A very large crude carrier VLCC, the kind of supertanker that makes economic sense for Persian Gulf oil transits, is worth somewhere between $80 million and $120 million, depending on age and configuration. Standard war risk premiums in a designated zone can range from 0.25% to as high as 5% of the vessel's insured value per voyage. In extreme cases, during active conflict, premiums have reached 10%. Do the math. 5% of a $100 million vessel is $5 million. Per trip, a typical VLCC voyage through the Strait of Hormuz and onto East Asian markets generates freight revenue on the order of $4 million in normal market conditions. The insurance premium now exceeds the revenue from the voyage itself. At that point, you don't need a physical blockade. You don't need Iranian frigates stopping ships at gunpoint. The economic logic of the situation simply removes commercial vessels from the water. Ship owners are not military commanders. They are business people with investors, lenders, and liability exposure. When the math stops working, they stop sailing.
Sailors.
This is what military strategists mean when they refer to economic interdiction without physical closure.
Means $5 million.
Iran closes the strait not by
for
blocking it with
voyage.
ships, but by making it financially irrational for commercial vessels to transit it. The mine, the $1,500 mine, is simply the trigger for a financial cascade that does the actual work. Act 4. Why America doesn't just sweep the mines. The obvious question at this point is, why doesn't the U.S. Navy simply deploy its mine? Countermeasures forces clear the strait and end the problem. The answer involves a concept that military planners call opportunity cost signaling, and it is one of the more counterintuitive aspects of modern deterrence strategy. The United States does, in fact, maintain substantial mine countermeasures (MCM) capabilities. The Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships are specifically designed for exactly this kind of threat. The Navy also operates MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters fitted with minesweeping equipment and, more recently, unmanned systems designed for mine detection and neutralization. But here is the strategic trap. If the U.S. immediately deploys full MCM capability the moment Iran lays mines, it establishes a specific and deeply uncomfortable ratio. Iran spends $1,500. The United States spends somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million per mine neutralized, when the United States spends somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million per mine neutralized. When you account for vessel operating costs, helicopter flight hours, ordnance expenditure, and force protection requirements. More importantly, rapid American MCM response would inadvertently demonstrate to Iran and every other state or non-state actor watching that the threat works, that you can force the world's most powerful navy to expend enormous resources by spending. The correct strategic response, at least in the early stages of a mining conflict, is often deliberate actions. Allow economic pressure to build, use diplomatic and financial channels to isolate the land, and let the global community, including China and other major oil consumers around the state, apply pressure from multiple fronts. This is sometimes called letting the math work. The United States does not need to immediately solve the tactical problem of the strategic situation by oil prices, increasing international pressure on Tehran, economic pain inside Iran itself. The waiting is not considered. What makes the Hormuz scenario genuinely alarming from long-term strategic planners is not it is what the immediate threat represents as a proof of concept for the next generation of asymmetric weapons. The naval mine in its current form is essentially a passive device. It sits, waits. Its intelligence is mechanical, pressure change, magnetic influence sensitive, and acoustic detector. It has no ability to discriminate between targets and adapt to them. Now imagine the same strategic logic with those enormous economic disruptions and minimal costs for the next generation We are entering an era in which small, cheap, networked systems can perform target discrimination, coordinate in swarms, adapt to countermeasures in real time, and be deployed by actors without any meaningful industrial base. The commercial drone technology that has transformed the battlefields of Ukraine and the Middle East is, at its core, the same technology platform. The semiconductor supply chain that makes your smartphone also makes the guidance system for a drone that costs $400 at retail. The implications of this extend well beyond the Strait of Hormuz. Every major infrastructure chokepoint in the global economy, undersea data cables, liquefied natural gas terminal, approaches major port approaches, critical bridge spans, faces a version of the same asymmetric threat calculation. The cost of disruption is falling rapidly. The cost of defense is not. When military and economic analysts talk about the democratization of destructive capability, this is what they mean. It is not primarily about nuclear proliferation, though that remains a serious concern. It is about the steady decline in the cost and technical complexity required to impose economically meaningful disruption on systems that were designed assuming attacks would be expensive and technically demanding. The $1,500 mine was designed in the mid-20th century and derives its strategic value from geography that has existed for millennia. The weapons coming next will be designed for a world of global supply chains, interconnected financial systems, and infrastructure dependencies that no previous generation of strategic planners has ever had to contemplate defending. What it actually means. Here is the uncomfortable conclusion that this analysis points toward. The era of military supremacy as a guarantor of economic security is not ending, but it is becoming substantially more complicated and expensive. The United States Navy can defeat the Iranian Navy in conventional combat without breaking a sweat. That capability is real, enormous, and not seriously in question by any serious analyst. But defeating the Iranian Navy does not solve the mining problem. It does not restore confidence in the war risk insurance market. It does not immediately restart the tanker traffic. That has been rerouted around Africa at enormous additional cost. Military victory and economic security are not the same thing, and in the Strait of Hormuz, the gap between them is exploited by a $1,500 steel sphere that has been sitting on the seabed doing nothing at all. The most powerful weapon in this scenario is not the B-2 bomber, not the aircraft carrier, not the submarine. It is, as the strategists say, patience, combined with an accurate understanding of where the real leverage actually lives. The Strait of Hormuz teaches us that in the 21st century, the most dangerous adversaries are not necessarily those with the most sophisticated weapons. They are those who most clearly understand the difference between military power and economic power, and who have figured out the cheapest possible way to exploit the gap between them. When a $1,500 object can hold the global economy hostage, the most important question is no longer who has the biggest navy. The question becomes, who has the most to lose? And in a world where 20% of global oil flows through a 2-mile corridor, the answer to that question includes almost everyone on Earth.